When one of Hollywood's most admired performers stepped onto what was supposed to be a standard morning talk show appearance, no one expected the encounter to spiral into one of the most uncomfortable moments daytime television had seen in years. A visit meant to promote a new film instead turned into a tense clash where years of professionalism ran headfirst into open disrespect and thinly veiled condescension. By the end of it, Samuel L. Jackson had left the set. The hosts were stunned into silence, and the studio audience was left trying to process what they had just witnessed. At that point, Samuel L. Jackson was in the middle of a busy press tour. Interviews had gone exactly as expected. He spoke with ease about his work, reflected on a career that spanned decades, and discussed upcoming projects with his usual mix of insight and humor. His reputation as a commanding presence both on screen and in person remained firmly intact. Nothing in his recent appearances hinted at the confrontation that awaited him on The View. The morning began without incident. Jackson arrived early, greeted the staff, and went through hair and makeup like any seasoned guest. Those who worked behind the scenes had long admired him for his professionalism. Despite the tough characters he often portrayed, he treated everyone with patience and courtesy. Crew members frequently remarked on how approachable he was, a quality that stood in sharp contrast to his intimidating on-screen persona. When the stage manager announced that it was time, Jackson adjusted his jacket and walked confidently toward the set. The audience responded immediately, breaking into loud applause as he appeared. He smiled, waved, and took his seat, fully at ease under the bright studio lights. Talk shows were familiar territory for him, another routine part of promoting his work and connecting with viewers. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed him warmly, introducing him to the audience with genuine enthusiasm. Jackson responded with gratitude, his deep voice steady and relaxed. The rest of the panel appeared equally pleased to have him there, exchanging smiles as the conversation began. At first, everything unfolded as expected. One of the hosts invited him to speak about his latest film and asked what continued to drive his passion for acting after so many years in the industry. Jackson leaned forward slightly, clearly engaged. He spoke about how each role still offered something new, how storytelling continued to challenge and inspire him, and how the current project pushed him in unexpected ways. His eyes lit up as he explained his process, reminding viewers why he remained one of the most respected figures in Hollywood. Then the tone shifted abruptly. Joy Behar cut in, her voice sharp and dismissive, steering the discussion away from his work. Instead of allowing him to finish his thought, she redirected the focus toward his age, suggesting that retirement was something he should be seriously considering. The comment landed heavily in the studio, drawing uneasy looks from the other hosts. The audience grew quiet, sensing the sudden change in energy. Jackson maintained his composure, though his expression tightened slightly. Before he could fully respond, Joy pressed on, emphasizing his age and arguing that it might be time for him to step aside. She spoke about younger performers needing space, framing her remarks as a reflection of a changing industry. Her words carried an unmistakable implication that his continued presence was no longer welcome. The discomfort on set became impossible to ignore. Estrom attempted to intervene, clearly trying to redirect the conversation and soften the moment. Joy brushed aside the effort, insisting that her point was valid and that the entertainment world needed to move on from older faces. She went as far as to suggest that continuing to work beyond a certain point became undignified. Jackson leaned back in his chair, taking a moment to absorb what was being said. Over the course of his long career, he had faced criticism and challenging interviews, but this was different. The comments were not about his work or performance. They were personal, dismissive, and framed in a way that reduced decades of achievement to a number. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm but carried a distinct edge. He restated what he had just been told, laying it out plainly and without embellishment. He spoke of his decades in the industry, the experience he brought to every role, and the idea that age alone should dictate whether someone continued to work. The studio remained silent, the weight of the moment hanging heavily in the air. Joy responded with a laugh that did little to ease the tension, downplaying the harshness of her words while standing by their meaning. She implied that audiences eventually grew tired of familiar faces and questioned how much longer someone like Jackson could realistically continue in demanding roles. Around them, cameras shifted and crew members exchanged glances, fully aware that something unprecedented was unfolding live on air. The atmosphere had changed completely. What began as a routine interview had transformed into a public confrontation that exposed deeper issues about respect, age, and the way accomplishments are dismissed. As the tension lingered, it became clear that this was no longer just another talk show segment, but a moment that would be replayed, debated, and remembered long after the cameras stopped rolling. The audience exchanged stunned looks, struggling to comprehend the level of disrespect unfolding in front of them. Murmurs rippled through the studio as people shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The phrase, the same old faces," echoed again, this time delivered more softly by Jackson. Anyone familiar with him knew that the lowered volume was far more ominous than raised anger. Calm, controlled restraint was where his most cutting moments lived. He turned his attention directly to Joy and spoke with deliberate precision. He referenced her long tenure on the show, pointing out how many years she had occupied that very seat. Joy, seemingly unaware of the tension she had stirred, answered with visible pride, declaring how long she had been there and how proud she was of every year. Jackson nodded slowly, absorbing her response before calmly noting her age and contrasting it with the criticism being leveled at him. The implication hung heavy in the air. The standard being applied to him clearly did not extend to her. Joy's expression tightened briefly, but instead of retreating, she leaned further into her stance. She argued that her role as a television host was fundamentally different, insisting that it did not involve the same physical demands as film acting. According to her, hosting required intelligence and sharp wit, not running, stunts, or physical performance. Jackson's eyes narrowed slightly. The man who had commanded respect across global film sets and corporate boardrooms was now witnessing an unusual blend of arrogance and contradiction. He responded with measured clarity, asking if she was implying that his profession required no intelligence or skill, that decades of disciplined craft could be reduced to little more than pretending with props. His tone never rose, but each word landed with weight. The other hosts began signaling urgently for Joy to stop, their faces etched with concern, yet she seemed too absorbed in her own commentary to notice. She continued, dismissing action films outright and minimizing their artistic value. That remark marked the precise moment when the entire studio seemed to hold its breath. There was a shared understanding that something irreversible had just occurred. Jackson leaned forward, psych posture shifting. For the first time since he had walked onto the set, the intensity audiences recognized from his most iconic performances was no longer fictional. He repeated her words slowly, his voice dropping into that unmistakable low register that carried both authority and warning. He explained with controlled emphasis that her understanding of his profession was painfully limited. Joy responded with a smirk, inviting him to elaborate. Still unaware that she was standing on unstable ground, Jackson began laying out his history with unwavering clarity. He spoke of his years studying theater, of performing Shakespeare on stage, of formal training in dramatic arts. He detailed the path he walked long before blockbuster films, years spent honing craft in theater spaces that demanded precision, depth, and emotional discipline. The smirk on Joy's face faded incrementally as each credential landed. Still, she pressed on, dismissing his achievements as distant history and questioning whether his recent work demonstrated genuine acting ability. The panel appeared visibly distressed. One host buried her face in her hands. Another looked desperately off stage, hoping for intervention. Whoopi Goldberg, herself a respected performer, sat rigid with discomfort, clearly appalled by the direction the exchange had taken. Jackson acknowledged the dismissal with a slow nod, his calm becoming more severe with every passing second. He listed his accolades, his nominations, and the directors who sought him out. He emphasized that these accomplishments were not relics but foundations that continued to shape his present career. The implication that his relevance had expired was not only insulting but absurd. Joy attempted to soften her position, claiming she was not minimizing his past, merely suggesting realism about his current standing. The words barely settled before Jackson rose from his chair. His height and presence immediately shifted the atmosphere. The studio fell silent, except for the faint mechanical hum of cameras capturing every second. He repeated her phrase about his place in Hollywood and began to explain exactly what that place was. He paced slowly, his movements controlled, yet charged with restrained energy. And he spoke of recent films, global box office success, and upcoming projects already in motion. He made it clear that directors and studios pursued him, that roles were written with him specifically in mind. The idea that he should quietly step aside stood in direct contradiction to reality. Joy tried to interject, but Jackson lifted a hand, halting her with an authority that filled the room. He reminded her that she had initiated this discussion and that he was now finishing it. He contrasted his ongoing work with her long tenure on the show, questioning what lasting contribution her platform had made beyond provocation and controversy. The audience was transfixed. What they had expected to be a standard morning segment had transformed into a masterclass in composure and precision. Jackson dismantled each argument methodically, never raising his voice, never losing control. When Joy defended herself as a voice for important issues, he echoed her words with pointed irony, highlighting the contradiction between that claim and her behavior. Finally, Whoopi attempted to intervene, suggesting a pause. Jackson turned toward her, his expression firm, signaling that the moment had already moved beyond interruption. "I respect you," Jackson said steadily, acknowledging her achievements without hesitation. "You are a gifted actress, a successful comedian, and a television host who has clearly earned her seat through years of dedication and effort." He paused, then gestured toward Joy with an open hand. But what just happened here, this attitude, this approach, is exactly what's broken in today's media landscape. He turned fully toward her. For the first time since the segment began, Joy looked genuinely uneasy. "You sit behind this desk every morning," Jackson continued, "and pass judgment on people whose lives and careers you couldn't step into for even a few minutes. You make sweeping declarations about industries you've never worked in, about crafts you've never seriously studied, and about people whose accomplishments far exceed anything you've personally built." Clearly trying to recover control of the moment. "Hold on," she said defensively. "I've been in entertainment longer than you. I was doing stand-up comedy when I was still what?" Jackson cut in calmly. "When I was struggling to get sober and trying to put my life back together. When I was fighting for every opportunity I could get, scraping for roles and proving myself day after day. When I was actually doing the work instead of sitting comfortably behind a desk making careless remarks about people who are still out there grinding." The admission settled heavily over the studio. Jackson rarely spoke publicly about his past struggles, and the fact that he chose to reveal them now made it clear how deeply the exchange had affected him. The audience sat in stunned silence, fully aware they were witnessing something raw and unfiltered. "You want to know the real difference between us, Joy?" Jackson went on, his voice now edged with a cold intensity that felt sharper than anger. "I've spent nearly 50 years refining my craft. I studied, trained, failed, learned, and pushed myself under some of the best teachers and directors in the world. I challenged myself with every role instead of playing it safe. You, on the other hand, have spent decades reading cue cards and offering opinions on things you don't fully understand." Joy's face flushed red as frustration set in. "You can't speak to me like that," she snapped. "This is my show. Your show?" Jackson laughed, though there was no amusement in it. "This is The View, not the Joy Behar show. And even if it were your personal platform, that still wouldn't give you the right to disrespect your guests. But what bothers me most about people in your position is this." He leaned forward, placing his hands firmly on the desk, locking eyes with her. "You think having a platform automatically makes you wise. You think holding a microphone means your opinions carry more weight than anyone else's. You've confused employment with authority." The silence in the studio was absolute. The faint hum of the air conditioning became noticeable. Camera operators froze, instinctively aware that they were capturing a moment that would be replayed again and again. "Let me explain what real authority actually looks like," Jackson said as he straightened to his full height. "Real authority comes from mastering your craft over decades. It comes from learning continuously, taking risks, failing publicly, and getting back up anyway. Real authority is earned through excellence and respect from your peers, not by tearing people down from behind a desk. Joy made one last attempt to regain control. I think you're overreacting, she said. I was just asking fair questions about the industry. Jackson slowly shook his head. There it is, the classic deflection. When someone gets called out for disrespect, suddenly the problem isn't the comment, it's that the other person is too sensitive. It's never that you crossed a line. It's that I'm supposedly incapable of handling your so-called legitimate questions. He began walking toward the edge of the stage, but his voice remained steady and deliberate. You want to know what a legitimate question would have looked like? You could have asked about my new film, about collaborating with the director, about the challenges the role demanded. You could have asked about my foundation work, my support for literacy programs, or the scholarships I've funded to help young actors who don't have access or privilege. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats, fully aware that their colleague had created a moment spiraling far beyond repair. Instead, Jackson continued, now standing at the edge of the stage, you chose to question my right to keep working. You chose to dismiss decades of effort as nothing more than loud action movies. You chose to suggest that my age somehow strips me of relevance, value, or basic respect. He turned back toward the panel one final time. His expression held disappointment, but also resolve. The saddest part of all this, Joy, is that you represent exactly what's wrong with how this industry and this country treats people. We discard experience, mock dedication, and confuse arrogance for insight. Joy, visibly shaken yet still trying to maintain control of the broadcast, opened her mouth to respond, but the weight of the moment had already shifted beyond her grasp. I think you're turning this into something far bigger than it needs to be, Joy said, trying to steady herself. Bigger than what exactly? Jackson cut in sharply, his voice rising for the first time since the exchange began. Bigger than a host telling a guest he's too old to keep working. Bigger than dismissing an entire lifetime of effort as worthless. Bigger than the kind of ageism that quietly destroys careers and crushes people every single day. He walked back toward the desk, but there was a sense of finality in his movement now, as if a line had been crossed that couldn't be undone. Let me explain something to you about respect, he said evenly, because you clearly don't grasp what it actually means. Respect isn't something you automatically receive just because you sit on television every morning. Respect is earned through how you treat other human beings. Whoopi tried to step in, visibly anxious to contain the moment. Samuel, I think what Joy was trying to say. No, Whoopi, Jackson said firmly, though not unkindly. Don't excuse it. What she meant is exactly what she said. She believes I'm too old, too irrelevant, and too far past my prime to deserve basic courtesy. That's not what I meant, Joy protested, her earlier confidence completely gone. Jackson looked at her with something close to pity. That's exactly what you meant, he said quietly, and the fact that you won't even stand by it now tells me everything I need to know. You want to insult people, but you don't want to deal with the consequences once those words land. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and held it up casually. When I leave here today, I'm going to call my agent and confirm the 3 film offers waiting on my desk. Then I'm going to speak with the director of my next project about the character work we're developing. After that, I'll sit down with the script for a Broadway play I'm considering for next year. Joy's face drained of color as she struggled to respond. But before I do any of that, Jackson continued, I'm going to do something you clearly never learned how to do. I'm going to think about how my words affect other people. Because unlike you, I understand that having a platform comes with responsibility. He began removing his microphone, each movement slow and deliberate. You see, Joy, the difference between us isn't age. It's not even talent. The difference is character. The studio was completely silent. No one in the audience shifted or whispered. Even the production crew had stopped moving, fully aware they were witnessing a moment that would be talked about for years.